Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that have taken a side, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. This land is our land now. As the world turns on its axis, bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Welcome to Globespan Television, broadcasting live here in New York. A special thanks to all our listeners and our sponsors, and to Noir Singh for making this program available, and to Mr. Devin Bissoon and Mr. Ryan Gobin. Tonight we have as our guest Mr. Vincent Alexander, former UG registrar and now GECOM commissioner. But before we get to Mr. Alexander, I want all of you to know that this program is a fair and balanced network, and the views expressed by our guests are those of his and not those of the staff or management of Globespan Television. It's unusual for me to broadcast on a Wednesday, but as of now, I'll be doing 2 broadcasts per month on Wednesday, the second and the last Wednesday in the month. And Mr. Noir Singh will do the other 2, the first and I think the third Wednesday in the month. So this is a change in scheduling at Globespan Television, and I hope you all will tune in on Wednesday nights to listen to all what we have to say and everything else. Now, I want our audience to know that Mr. Aubrey Norton was supposed to be in our program last Monday, but he canceled at the last minute, and we could not have had anyone to come on, so we had to do a rerun. So I hope you'll at least bear with us on that. Now, when someone cancels at the last minute, it's difficult for us to find someone. And this is the second time Mr. Norton has done that. Reasons unknown, and I will not go further into that. But for now, I want to welcome Mr. Alexander to our program. Mr. Alexander, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good evening to the viewers.
Thank you. Mr. Alexander, you have been a commissioner of GECOM for how many years now?
From 2007 to present, approximately 18 years.
That's 18 years. And can you tell us which were your best years at GECOM and your worst years? Just a snapshot.
Well, it depends on how one defines best.
Okay.
It depends on how one defines best. But I would say that my best period at GECOM was under the chairmanship of Steve Surajbali.
Okay.
Simply because he sought to forge consensus. And I think that the persons who were commissioners at that time were also more disposed to consensus. So the Surajbali period, I think, was the better period. As I said, it depends on how you define better or best. But the fact that I was able to be extremely effective in 2011, for me, is also a landmark year.
Okay. And why that was the landmark year?
Because in 2011, I was able to be sufficiently vigilant, sufficiently alert, and sufficiently knowledgeable of the electoral system and the formula for calculating of the distribution allocation of seats, that I was able to discern that the chief elections officer at that time was involved in an attempted fraud, where he sought to produce a result which gave the PPP a majority, when in fact the votes casted for them was only 48.1%, and could not represent the majority. I was able to discern that, and I was able to turn back that attempt. And that was critical in the sense that in 2006, there was a similar occurrence in Region 10, which was discerned as well, brought to the attention of the Commission, rectification promised, the results announced without rectification, and then as has become the tradition in Guyana, the petition fell apart on procedural grounds.
But nothing like this happened in 2015 or 2020?
No, nothing like that happened in 2015 or 2020. I think that 2020 has not been subject to the kind of analysis it should be subject to. 2020, the normal process was aborted by consensus, I think, between the opposition leader and the incumbent president, and a recount was substituted for the normal process. But there are normal processes which were not allowed to go the full distance in 2020. And everybody speaks about how long we waited for results in 2020. Nobody looks back to see that, in fact, we could have gotten a result in the normal course of things if the normal process had been allowed to work.
Tell us, give us a little insight of the structure of GECOM. If GECOM needs a quorum of, and I stand corrected, GECOM needs a quorum of 6 people. And this means that if you and your other 2 commissioners are not present, a meeting cannot be held. But a meeting will be called 24 hours after, and a quorum required then is 4 people. Am I right?
If GECOM needs a quorum of 5 persons.
5, okay.
2 persons nominated by the leader of the opposition, 2 persons nominated by the governing party, and the chairperson. If it fails, so in other words, once 2 persons from either the nominees of the opposition or the government are absent, then it lacks a quorum. In the absence of that, the meeting can be reconvened within 48 hours, at which time any 4 persons can constitute a quorum.
Okay. Now, I stand corrected again, and you're there to correct me. Now, if GECOM should call a meeting and the opposition don't agree with that meeting, they could attend the meeting and abstain from voting. What abstention from voting will lead to?
Well, decisions are made by the vote. So that if you abstain and there is a majority still voting for, it goes through. Abstention simply suggests that you are not contributing to the decision which is being made, because in any circumstance you are not supportive of the course of action that's being taken. So you're not saying no, you're not saying yes, you're saying I will not be involved. Let me explain that in context.
Okay.
I abstained recently when the results were brought for ratification by the Commission. Why did I abstain? I abstained because I had said prior to, and continue to say, that GECOM's operation could not produce a result that's free, fair, and transparent. In other words, I was not looking to see what the count was. I was saying that I would not support an election where certain basic things were not done. And therefore, notwithstanding what took place in the actual election, I would abstain because I didn't agree that we had put in place a process that could be certifiable in terms of producing a free, fair, and transparent election. I equated that to what I call the International Standards Organization certification, a certification of services and manufacturing, which does not wait for the service to be delivered or for the good to be manufactured. What it does is to say, if you are going to produce a good or deliver a good service, a priori, here are things that should be in place. And if those things are not in place, we're not going to certify you. So you may produce a good, but we're not certifying that. That is my disposition to GECOM. If you don't fix identification of the voters, which is critical for an election, if you don't ensure that all the people who are entitled to vote are able to vote, if you allow people who are not entitled to vote, then it's a corrupt process. And therefore, my disposition was, process was corrupted, and therefore, irrespective of what happened during that process, I'm not associating myself with it, I abstain.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago, and the Constitution allows that the government appoints 3 commissioners. The opposition appoints 3 commissioners as well, which is a recipe for gridlock, but that's what exists right now. Now, we will have a new opposition in Parliament, but there's a conflict with this type of laws in the Constitution and the Constitution of itself, because you as a commissioner are appointed for an indefinite period. So no one can move you. So where that puts the leader of the opposition, the new leader of the opposition, Mr. Azharuddin Mohammed, he will not have if you and the other 2 commissioners don't resign, he cannot appoint new commissioners. You think that is fair to him?
I think this is a question that needs to be interrogated. First of all, I don't think the Carter formula was intended to be a permanent formula.
That is true.
And what our politicians have not done, the legislature has not done, not only on the question of the Elections Commission, but on the question of constitutional reform post-2001, they have not undertaken the continuation of the reform process as they promised they would. So that we have an Elections Commission which is constituted in a particular way that was not intended to be used beyond the 1992 election. So that's the first problem. Then if we look at the law itself, it obviously is incongruent. You have a situation where the law specifies that the opposition leader nominates 3 persons in consultation with the opposition parties, and the governing party nominates 3 persons. And then there's no provision for a renewal of that body. The nominations and the appointments, which are done by the president because he's a constitutional officer, are indefinite. So that I have had this live experience. I came to the commission in 2007 as a nominee of the leader of the opposition appointed by the president. And I served from 2011 up to 2015 in that position. No problem. 2015, the opposition became the ruling party. But there's no mechanism to say, well, look, this new opposition can now make its own nominations, and the new party can make its own nominations. We just rolled over. And nobody complained because it was flipping the coin. So those of us who were in opposition became in government, the government became in opposition, flipping the coin. But we are now faced with a situation where it's not simply a flipping of the coin, where a new body will assume leadership of the opposition. And so the question arises, well, these people are supposed to be nominees of the opposition, but they're not because we knew. So the issues that arise are, one, we are not representatives. And I have to say this repeatedly, and it's confronting us now more than before. We are not representatives of the opposition or the government. We are constitutional officers appointed after nomination by leader of the opposition and leader of the governing party. So we are representatives. I would assume that when we are nominated, the assumption is that we have the level of knowledge and the level of integrity to be objective and to operate within the context of a constitutional body. Now, in that regard, there really should be no problem. But I will also contend that it is, in a sense, incongruous to have people rolling over when the coin is flipping, and that really the system needs to be reviewed in that regard. But from a legal perspective, the system is what it is, that the commissioners cannot be removed unless they die or unless they resign, or unless the legislature decides that the time has come to put in place a mechanism for removal and renewal. And I would contend that such legislation may in fact make our system less incongruous. Presently, it's incongruent. And it is very much like many of our laws and many of our institutions, which are not really reflective of the needs of our society, not reflective of the plurality of our society, not reflective of the norms of good governance. And therefore, for all intents and purposes, whilst there is no illegality, I do concur that there is a need for an overhaul. As much of what we do in governance needs to be overhauled.
I agree. GECOM has been in existence for almost over 30 years, and there's been no reform of the system. But let me ask you this question, Mr. Alexander. And I know you're an honest person with high integrity. Since Mr. Mohammed will be appointed a leader of the opposition, official leader of the opposition, don't you think that you're obligated to resign and let him appoint his own members? I know, as you said, you're not representing the opposition, you're a judicial appointment. But do you think you're appointed by the opposition? Don't you think it is time for you all to resign and give him a chance to appoint his own commissioners?
Let me put it this way. I need to emphasize a certain point. We are not appointed by the leader of the opposition. We are nominated. So there's a mechanism for identification of commissioners, but at the end of the day, these commissioners are not persons who are obligated to, necessarily aligned with the source of their nomination. They are appointed, and therefore there is some degree of autonomy related to the office of leader of commissioner. Having said that, let me say the following. I used to be the chairman of the National Accreditation Council, and I was appointed at that time by the president. When the government changed in 2020, I immediately offered my resignation to the then government, since I thought that I should not interfere with the president who made that appointment, being able to determine whom he wished to appoint. And so I offered my resignation. I offered my resignation to a government that simply ignored that offer. They didn't say yay, they didn't say nay. There was no response. This is the level of indecency and lack of decorum that we have to operate under. They said neither nay nor yea. But I myself never again attended a meeting of that body. And when the term came to the end, the government then did what they wanted to do. Now here it is that from a strict standpoint of principle, I do agree that notwithstanding the problems with our law, which does not impose upon me an obligation other than to continue in office, but in principle, in a normal political environment, the thing to do, in fact, is to offer one's resignation. I make a difference between offering and actually resigning. So I do agree, yes, that the thing to do is to offer one's resignation. But my disposition is that we are in such a faulty and flawed system. I don't know rectitude works. I don't know rectitude works. And so in those circumstances, I will leave it to the political beings to make a determination of the way forward as I continue having been appointed as someone who's considered to be capable of doing the job. And the job is not for the opposition. The job is for the nation.
My next question to you is a biting one. Have you discussed with your colleagues in the opposition what you all intend to do?
I have raised this matter because it's one of the issues that's a buzz right now. I have raised this matter, and at this point in time, what we are going to do is no different from what I've just said.
And that is to offer your resignation.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said that in the political milieu of Guyana, in the dysfunctionality of things and all of that, that though in principle in writing is to offer one's resignation, in our circumstances, we stay the course. In Guyana's circumstances, we stay the course.
We all know that GECOM needs to make some massive changes. I won't say radical, massive changes. Can you highlight 3 areas in which you think there should be changes at GECOM?
Certainly. I agree that there should be a change in the composition of the commission. I think that we need to work towards a commission that in some regards mirror the commission in Jamaica, where the politicians, though there are people who are, and in Jamaica it's different, you have actual political appointees. You don't have this facade of nominees and then appointees. You have actual political appointees. But the way in which they have constituted their commission, it does not allow for the political people to be the determining factor. There's sufficient number of civil society, etc., to create a balance, but I think there's a veto that the politicians have so that they can stop something, but they can't do their own thing, so to speak. So I think there's a need for the commission to be reconstituted. But even as I say that, I live a fear. I live a fear. In Guyana, civil society itself very often is dominated by the political entities. And so, if we change and we give more scope to civil society, there's no guarantee that the people coming from civil society will not in fact be political minded in the work that they do. And that's a fear I have because of the politics of Guyana. You know, I have seen, for example, we have had observer groups at elections And I've seen relatively high-profile politicians come as observers on the NGOs. I have had the experience in the Constitutional Reform Commission, the previous commission, where the PPP man who is from Berbice, liaison to the Prime Minister, represented the Muslim society, where the other PPP man represented the youths. Other PPP man represented the farmers. And so what you have, in fact, is a mask. They come on the pretense of representing civil society, but they virtually are, they don't even have the dignity of allowing their conscience to determine what they do. They literally take instructions. And so we have a serious problem that is not restricted to GECOM. It's a national problem. How do we ensure real inclusion in those decision-making bodies? So yes, I think there's need for change, but the change is more fundamental than just numbers. It requires a whole disposition towards our politics and our embrace of good governance. And the same thing is reflected today in the Constitutional Reform Commission. You have a Constitutional Reform Commission established. There are 23 members, I think. Of the BAT, 7 are ministers of government. Of the BAT, 7 are ministers of government. And then you can go around the table and you can see the others and their alignment. And so basically, you don't really have a body representative of a cross-section of views on that body. It's again being used for control and dominance. So we are in a crisis. We are dysfunctional when it comes to governance in this country. Everything is in breach of the essence and the principles and the intent of our Constitution. And that's why even elections are dysfunctional.
Folks, it's 7:54, 7:56. You're listening to Globespan Television live. I hope you'll continue to stay with us throughout the entire hour and a half. And as I said to you, my guest tonight is Mr. Vincent Alexander. He's a commissioner at GECOM. Mr. Alexander, except for the GHRA, which is the Guyana Human Rights Association, all the observers, both local and foreign, have pronounced on the election that it was free, fair, and transparent. Do you agree? If not, what are your reasons for not agreeing?
I have had in the past make the comment that the observers are what observers are. They observe. And you can have, like I said, I wouldn't certify the elections because the issues that concern me are manifest free and are not very much manifest during the election itself, right? So that during the election, you get the impression that there's no problem with identification of individuals, but there's a fundamental problem with identification. And so if in the course of elections, there is no obvious, visible problem with that, then what's the problem, people would say. And so yes, the observers have said that the elections are peaceful or without problems because the events of the day were in fact largely like that. Not that there weren't issues, there were some issues. And I don't know that that observers, their attendance at 2,900 stations represents a sample that one can scientifically say that what they saw is what indeed occurred. There are a minimum number of 2,900 something stations, but what they saw, wherever they saw, what was visible to them seems pretty okay. You know, I took 2 observers from one of the local organizations. And I said to them, let's do an observation that I want to show you. Look and see if when that card is being flashed, that ID card, which is being flashed, if the agents are in sufficient range to see what's that person. And the answer is no. But it's flashed, so they're doing the right thing according to what GECOM has set up. The answer is no. I then say to them, let's take an ID card and see if our ID cards are really usable for identification purposes, facial identification. And the fact of the matter is that we have ID cards that were issued to 14-year-olds in 2008. They're now 31 years old. The features have changed, and you really cannot use the ID card for identification. But you go into the polling booth, the name is called out, the card is flashed, the name is crossed off, the person goes to vote. What could be more smooth than that? What could be more smooth than that? So we do have a situation where I cannot have a quarrel with the observers because they have operated in the context of what the system is. My problem is with the system. And so I don't say yea or nay for what happened on election day. I say nay about what is happening because it should not happen without the things I think which are fundamental to a process that can guarantee free, fair, and transparent elections. So I don't have a quarrel with the observers. I understand what they have done. They have done what they are allowed to do. I have been an observer myself. I know what it is to observe, as opposed to tear the system down, starting with what happens before elections, because a lot of what affects us are things that occur before and not during the day of elections.
Folks, it's 8:01 p.m. And again, you're listening to Globespan Television, coming to you live. Mr. Alexander, I don't want to go back, but let me just hark back to 2020. After the recount by the CARICOM team of personnel, did you certify the election?
No, I didn't. I did not.
Why?
I did not cast a vote in favor in 2020.
And may I ask why?
I abstained in 2020 in the same manner in which I abstained in 2025. And in fact, I think 2025 is more known to the public than 2020.
Why
2020,
I
made a proposition. My proposition was that what occurred on the East Coast did not allow GECOM to count the valid votes, was that we could not invalidate all of the votes. It's common sense to know that they were valid votes. Therefore, my proposition was for the votes in those 47 boxes to be nullified and for a by-election to be held. That was my position in 2020. There are a lot of jokers out there running around saying what I did. But the fact of the matter is, the records would show I called for a by-election to ensure that, one, we didn't take into the system votes that we couldn't validate, and two, that we didn't invalidate votes that were obviously authentic votes.
Tell our listeners what happened to those. How many boxes you said in 2020?
There were 47 boxes.
What happened to those boxes?
When we did the recount in 2020, it was not the kind of recount we did a few days ago. It was a recount done on special circumstances by an order that is an individual order, meaning that order pertains only to 2020. What that order provided for is not simply an arithmetic check. It provided for a determination of the validity of the votes. So you went into the boxes, you were able to go to the pink slips where the names were crossed off as to who would have voted, and therefore you were able, in the first instance, to see that the number of votes in the ballot box were equivalent in the number of persons recorded as having voted. This recount we didn't go through that process. It simply did an arithmetic check. It also provided then an opportunity which APNU AFC used to contest some of the names which were crossed off as having passed the vote. On that basis, APNU AFC presented to GECOM allegations of people being voted for who were out of the country. That process followed right through to immigrations with a verification of a percentage of those allegations. In fact, the first and second tranche were sent for verification. There were about 20 other tranches which were not sent for verification. And even as the recount was going on, we got responses from immigration saying, according to our records, here are persons who are not in the country. Now, the EPP reacted to that and pulled up a few names and said, here are people who were saying that they were in the country. My response to that was that if you look to what immigrations did, they did verify only a percentage, that indeed there were some people who the APNU alleged were out, who were in. But immigration said, here are the ones who were out. And they did concede that they were the ones who were in. But what happened, all of that information was put aside. Funny enough, none of it was brought to the attention of the CARICOM people who were the observers. And so they wrote into their report that they had no knowledge of this. None of this was brought to attention. All was laid aside, and all of the votes were counted in the arithmetic way of a normal account, and the result declared, which I did not agree with, for the purpose I previously mentioned. And what makes it worse for me is that approximately 2 years ago, there came Attorney General Nandalal. He sequestered all of the allegations that the APNU had submitted, the APNU FC. He contended at that time that he was going to use the mechanism available, which is available, that's the records of the immigration people, to disprove the allegation. 2 years have passed and nothing has happened in that regard. He's become definitely silent on that matter, which for me makes the suspicion even greater, not just of what occurred, but who had an interest in what occurred.
Can you tell our listeners what caused you not to certify this election here in 2025?
This 2025 elections?
Yes.
What caused me not to certify it?
Yes.
I approached GECOM in the manner in which I would approach a manufacturer or a service deliverer who asks for certification so that the product, when it's out, would have been certified as meeting the required standards of that product. That's how I approach GECOM as a body. My contention is that a number of things that GECOM did not do are things which are required, are the standards under which GECOM should operate. And since they did not do those things, and some of the things which they did are not the standards, then they did not have a process that could be certified. And if I can't certify the process, then I can't recommend the good or the service. That was my disposition to the elections. I can't recommend the good or the service because the process that brought it into being did not have essential elements, did not meet the standards required for the conduct of free and fair elections. So I'm equating my operation to the ISO It's National Standards Organization certification.
On a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, how would you equate Justice Claudette Singh?
I had the embarrassing and difficult task on one occasion to say to Justice Claudette Singh that she's incompetent. I think that to say that was trying not to be prejudicial in saying that she was aligning herself with the governing party. But there's evidence that much of what she has done, that she's not up to the job or does not intend to be up to the job. And let me give you the latest of evidence. We were summoned to a meeting on the Friday evening that was supposed to be the meeting where the CEO presents his report. I was at GECOM at around 8 in that evening. The recount for Region 5 was incomplete at around 8. And I then proceeded to the tabulation center on a different location. And the tabulation for the recount for Region 4, District 4, was incomplete. I left that venue around 9 in the evening, or plus, later than 9. Clearly, in my mind, understanding that the recount, on one hand, may not be completed during the course of that night, and the tabulation for that recount, which had not started, could not be completed in the course of that night. And lo and behold, I got a message giving me about an hour and a half notice, if so much, to attend an 11 o'clock meeting with the CEO to present his report. Now, my disposition to that is that he either have to have some report prepared in advance, but because given where the count was, I don't know how he could have compiled a report in time for 11 o'clock. And so my assumption was, this is not serious. And so I did not attend that meeting. You have it out there that we want to slow things up and sabotage and all of that. But there was no logic to a meeting at 11 when at 9 something, the count was still being done, tabulation had not started. So I did not attend. I subsequently attended the Saturday evening meeting at 11 Saturday evening. Now, that meeting, according to the law, provides for the CEO to bring a report. That's what that meeting provides for, the CEO to bring a report. The CEO brought a report. That was complete insofar as everything that was required was there, whether everything that's required, in fact, was completed in the process is another question, but it was there. So he brought the report, it was circulated, and then the chairman proceeded to read the declaration of the presidency. That's what she did, read that the elections had been held, that the PPPC had prevailed, and declared Dr. Ali as the president. And then the meeting just went completely silent. Then a commissioner asked that the meeting be adjourned. And what I said or previously is all that had been done. Documents circulated. She made a declaration of some sort. We don't have copies of that declaration. Up to now, I don't have copies, so I asked for it. I then said, but what does this adjournment mean? We have a document that was now given to us in the meeting. We have not yet interrogated this document. And you're adjourning this, you're seeking to have an adjournment as if we have done all that we were supposed to do. Therefore, on my intervention, time was given to interrogate the document, which I interrogated the document, and then made the point that there had been no declaration of the results as the law required. The law specifies that the chairperson, having received the report, must facilitate a public declaration of the results, and that public declaration of the results should then lead to a publication in the Gazette. To date, we've had no public declaration of our results. Had no public declaration, the manner in which I said to them, I recalled in 2011 that we, having had our meeting, then proceeded to the Pegasus, where there was a public declaration of all of the results, not the presidency. What they then did was she then murmured a declaration of the general election results. There's no written document to date in that regard of a declaration. There has been no public declaration. There probably has been something as it. And this is what has occurred under her chairmanship. So you can't deem her to be competent, even if these things do not have serious material impact on the outcome of the elections. There's certainly serious flaws in the manner of conduct of the affairs of GECOM. And the manner of conduct is intended to ensure that there's no possibility of irregularities, because those procedures kind of insulate the organization from irregularities. We have not had the insulation. In my humble opinion, she's turned out to be incompetent in the conduct. Whether that I will not publicly say whether I think the incompetence is an act of intent or simply is an act of a demonstration of our capacity.
Mr. Alexander, there's something that can be right. Ghana has about 800,000 people, roughly. I think July stats show about 796,000. So how can GECOM tell us that 757,000 people are registered to vote? Can we get a clear up of that list before the next 5 years?
GECOM can tell you that 757,690 persons were registered. And I have no problem with that figure as the number of persons registered. I have no problem with that. I'll tell you why. We have a judge who sat and determined that there is no legal basis for us to have a periodic re-registration. And so our voters list, which is determined, which is extracted from the register of registrants, represents persons who were registered in 2008 right through to 2025. It is possible that indeed 757,690 persons were indeed registered. So in that sense, the list represents a fact. The problem is our system and our court, which seems not to understand our reality. Courts are supposed to reflect not just the law, are supposed to apply and contextualize the law. Our reality is that a large number of the persons of that 757,690 are overseas. And they're entitled to be registered. But the reality is that of that large number overseas, thousands have died. And there's no mechanism to take them off the list. The mechanism we would have had to take them off the list is to do a new registration. There's no mechanism to take them off the list. So we have developed a system that allows for thousands and probably hundreds of thousands of dead people to remain on our voters list. And it is that cesspit that is then used in the face of facial identification problems and in the face of ink that can be removed to allow for impersonation. So if you look at this whole system, you can see where the system is flawed. But the flaw is not in the number in the register. The flaw is in that the number is allowed to be in the register, given how many people would have died. And therefore, we have to have a system that seeks to remove the dead, irrespective of where they are. And one of the ways of doing that is by renewing your register. When I argued, as I argued for digital registration, and more particularly digital identification, I was facing the reality of a list of 757,690. I was facing that reality. And I was saying, in the face of that reality, if we do digital identification, then the list cannot be misused. But there are those who decided it wouldn't happen, and there can only be a certain motive in that kind of decision. That's the problem we are faced with. That's the problem we are faced with. One may argue, in terms of what happened on election day, that things went smoothly. But our system is corrupted, it's rigged. Our system is rigged. And it isn't rigged on any day. It is systemically rigged. And unless we correct that, then we have a problem in giving, I have a problem in giving certification to elections.
One of my listeners has sent me a question here. And listeners, please, I can't ask all the questions, so don't just flood my phone with questions here. You said that a judge ruled that you can't remove names from the list. The listener is asking then why that case was not appealed.
I can't answer that. I wasn't the person who brought the case, and I was in no position to appeal the case. I can't answer that.
And the same listener is saying, then why GECOM don't ignore that list if it can be renewed and then go and register people and get a proper account of the registration of the amount of Guyanese eligible to vote?
GECOM cannot do other than what the law provides for. And though GECOM sometimes does not do what the law provides for, this would be the most blatant act of breaching the law if GECOM were to go and do a new registration. And of course, those who brought the earlier case would then have another case to bring. GECOM in that regard is hamstrung. But what GECOM has not done is to put other mechanisms in place that would negate the ill of a list that people refer to as a bloated list. I never call it a bloated list. It represents people who are legitimately registered, but it also represents people in the thousands who died and are still there, not to mention that it also has many people in Guyana who have died whose names are still on the list. I met former Minister Holder at Ogle election day. His wife's name is on the list, and she's died years ago. I sat near to Nicola Trotman in a GECOM session, and she told the GECOM officials her mother who died 30 years ago, her name is on the list. But we at GECOM sat down and refused to activate a law, the provisions of the National Registration Act of 2022, the amended act, which provides for GECOM to receive reports from the police that they have of the deaths and to receive a report from the chief medical officer that he has of the deaths, to supplement the reports from the Register of Births and Deaths, which report is deficient because names continue to be on the list. And GECOM refused to activate those provisions of the law, refused to activate them on spurious grounds that some instrument doesn't meet the legal requirements for them to activate it. And so we sat there and consciously administered an election, knowing that there are dead people who could be removed from the list, but who were not removed from the list because of GECOM's dereliction of duty.
Folks, it's 8:24. You're listening to Globespan Television. I have here as our guest Mr. Vincent Alexander, which a commissioner at GECOM. Mr. Alexander, since the judge is telling GECOM that they cannot change anything from that list, the judge did not say you cannot go and register new people. So why GECOM don't take what it says? We're going to register new people, and we're going to tell the population, look, this is a new registrant, X amount of thousands eligible to vote, but the old list says that. So we're going to go with the new list. Is there anything barring GECOM from doing that?
The judgment is unequivocal. The judgment says that your register of registrants cannot be canceled. You have to retain all of the names of the people in that register of registrants. It also says that you have to extract your voters list from that register, and you cannot neglect to extract the name of any person who is on that register. The judgment recognized that in terms of dead persons, we do receive reports from the GRO, and that those reports can be used to flag those names, and those names should not appear on the electoral roll. So the judge says, yes, you have a mechanism. The judge also says, you have something called claims and objections. So that when you have claims and objections, you can go and make an objection to somebody's name. The fact of the matter is, how do I make, and who makes an objection for the thousands of Guyanese who have died overseas? We don't know the persons. We know the fact that people have died. We don't know the persons. So the mechanisms that the judge says are in place are inadequate. They are inadequate. And what the judgment says is that you can't go and develop a new register. You have to use this register, and you have to extract your list from that register. There is no out for GECOM in that regard.
But from what you're telling me, the judge did tell GECOM they can register new people. They can do a complete new list.
No. You see, registration, there's a process. We have a database. We do register new people. We do register new people, but they are added to the extant database. We cannot make a different new register.
You cannot make a new list?
We can make a new voters list, and that new voters list is an extract from the register, and it has to extract all of the people who have met the age requirement to vote. The voters list is not separate and apart from the register. It is a subset of the register, and we cannot interfere with the content of the register, except for claims and objections, where some dead people could be removed, or what we get from the GRO, where those registered deaths can be removed. Now, GECOM is hamstrung in that regard.
Now, so you're telling me that we're going into 2030 elections with the same list?
I don't know what we're doing in 2030. For me, when I indicated that I couldn't give my fiat to the results, I said that I have seen my role in GECOM to be that of an advocate for transformation. As long as I'm in GECOM, will continue to advocate for change. And that's as much as I can do. GECOM is made up the way it's made up. We have explained the problems about it, the way it's made up. It requires, for all intents and purposes, a consensus of the people in the legislature, the relevant changes to be made. But it is clear that the changes are required. And interestingly, whilst we argued for biometrics and all of that, and it's pushed back, and not dealt with, when confronted at a time when we could no longer do it, certain commissioners says, well, we haven't given up on that. We'll get to it after elections. So having achieved what they thought they wanted to achieve for these elections, when confronted with the observers and other people, they no longer defended the state of things. They said, probably the state of things are not the best, but we look after that after the elections. So they have the result they want. The Lord knows what will happen now the elections are.
Mr. Alexander, you and the commissioners are not embarrassed. In 2020, GECOM said 691,000 persons registered to vote. And at that time, 465,000 people voted. In 2025, GECOM said 757,000 people registered to vote. And in actuality, 438,000 voted. We know the voter turnout was low. But as commissioners, you and the chairperson, you are not embarrassed by putting out those numbers? Because it doesn't make you all look incompetent?
Well, I'm ashamed, but certainly not embarrassed, because I have disassociated myself with those things you're talking about. I have publicly disassociated myself with those things, but I am a part of a body where the collective majority vote determines the position of the commission. I distance myself from that. I let the public know. I account to the public. I say, no, I'm not a part of that. But the fact of the matter, if 4 vote in favor and 3 do not, the decision still goes down. So yes, it's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment. I'm ashamed. But I feel that the extent to which I'm there pushing for change is the extent to which, one, I would disassociate myself from that embarrassment, and 2, I'm still trying to ensure day after day that we have the kind of change that will relieve us of that embarrassment.
I think there's a law, but I can't remember what it is. I'll come to that just now. But Mr. Alexander, I'm going to dig deeper into this question. You and the other commissioners, the chairperson, the chairwoman, the Justice Thing, the CEO, Prasad, and others at GECOM are being paid by the taxpayers. Taxpayers are paying you all to give them wrong information.
The taxpayers pay me, and I report to the taxpayers what my efforts are and what my distancing from what occurs is. I do that. I'm doing that even now. And I would suggest that probably if I weren't there, things would be worse.
If someone else in another department give out that type of information, he or she might be charged or fired, because the taxpayers paying the 6 commissioners, and I don't know your salary, paying the chairperson, the CEO, and others to give them wrong information. This is a problem.
Well, they do not see themselves as giving wrong information. They don't see themselves that way. You will be surprised at the arguments that people put up to justify what I'm referring to as some things that should not be occurred. All sorts of arguments are put up. So nobody accepts that, they're doing it wrong. Nobody accepts that.
Was this matter taken up with the chair?
Which matter?
About the bloated list?
This question of the list is ad nauseum. Like I said to you, when we discussed the question of biometrics, it is contextualized against a list that is quote unquote bloated, not the word I use. When I talk about highlighting the names of the overseas Guyanese on the list, another proposition which I made, so that the people at the poll can be more vigilant, it's all about this list. At the bottom of the issue is a list that is not fit for purpose. And every time we discuss these various approaches, that is what we are discussing. list.
I have a question here from one of our listeners. They said, indeed, you have been advocating for a biometric system for voters. But are the government ministers supporting you in this cause?
They have stoutly opposed it. That's why it hasn't happened. They have opposed it. That's why it hasn't happened. They have found various ways of opposing it. Eventually, they came down to say it was too late. I presented a motion to GECOM in I think it was 2022 or 2023 on this question of biometrics. They started off by saying they have to do a research to bring a proposition to the commission. That took about a year. So there are ways in which they have pushed back. Then when it came in November of last year for discussion, after being presented a year before. So all sorts of shenanigans, all sorts of mechanisms were used to slow up the process because the arguments against it are not unacceptable. So other mechanisms were used, including arguments against it. And eventually it came down to say, well, we don't have time. Things like, the chairperson would tell us things like, we need legislation if we're going to do that. And I would say, well, why if we need legislation, why don't we advise the legislature that we need legislation? And then people in GECOM would say, well, that's not our business to get involved in legislation. All sorts of what could only be described as crap, but not crap because it was in pursuit of an objective, which may have been achieved.
Do you have any inkling why they would oppose biometrics, though?
If you have an interest in impersonation, then you oppose biometrics because it will expose you. It will interfere with your objective of impersonation at the place of vote. Evidence suggests in 2020 that there was significant impersonation at the place of vote. Simple. And so Nandalal takes the evidence and he probably has it in cold storage so that you can't let the public know that we have evidentially there has been an impersonation. And the little evidence out there of the 500 something that were verified with a percentage of 75% proven to be the case where people were not in the country, you behave as if, there's some people called riggers, and therefore, once they say anything, it's in the context of rigging, and therefore you don't have to listen to them. And so I'm quite sure, even as I speak here tonight to you, there are people on your online who cannot speak to anything that I'm saying, but will seek immediately to say, I shouldn't be saying anything. But they can't speak to what I'm saying. They can't argue against it. But they'll try to say it's not an argument that should be listened to because it's Alexander. And I'm quite sure that there are trolls on your program doing that.
Since being nominated by your party in 2007, have you taken any directive from the PNCR then, or
I do not take directives. I do not take directives.
So you acted independently?
I would have discussions with them. I would share views with them. And in fact, I'm prepared to do that not only with the PNC, I'm prepared to do it with any opposition party. And I've done it with opposition parties. Because at the end of the day, it's about the people's interests. And the extent to which they represent an interest is the extent to which you must be able to listen to them.
Okay. Let me just tell our listeners that Mr. Noir Singh will host this program on the first and third Wednesdays every month, and I will host on the second and fourth Wednesday every month. So be prepared to tune in on Wednesdays now. Now, Mr. Alexander, you're an intelligent person, and you know when an election is held, there will be some what you call misunderstandings or hiccups. Did we have any major hiccups in this election here?
On election day, I have no knowledge of major hiccups.
Okay.
On election day, I have no knowledge of major hiccups. There are issues that ought to be interrogated. For example, there were instances where even in the posting of the SOPs, at one time there were some SOPs posted with no content in terms of allocation, but with signatures. Difficult to understand how that could happen. There are other instances where some SOPs were posted without signatures, but with content. Difficult to understand how that could happen. Those things need to be explained. There are, all intents and purposes, something is wrong for those things to occur. I was approached by a polling agent for a party other than the APNU. The polling agent said to me, the figures I see announced there are figures other than the ones I signed to as a polling agent. I therefore went and did a thorough investigation. I allowed that polling agent to show me the documents that he or she has, and I went and I checked the GECOM documents. Specifics. On the tally sheet, APNU AFC, Folly Nursery School, got 67 votes on the tally sheet. On the SOP, it's 65 votes. On the tabulation sheet, it's 67 votes. Now, I can't explain why the difference. What is comforting is that 67 turns up on the tabulation sheet, having been on the tally sheet, with 65 on the SOP, which is supposed to be the source document for the tabulation. And these are all GECOM documents. So, there are things that have occurred that requires an explanation as to how they could have occurred and require that people be held responsible for what may have occurred. I heard of an instance where a polling agent identified someone facially as not the right person and even sought to indicate that there was traces of the ink. And the presiding officer said there's nothing she could do about that. The person was allowed to do. Mark you, our ink, as standalone, is useless. Our ink, standalone, is useless. I have provided the DCU pictorial information of someone who voted, and not very long after, you could find no trace of ink on the person's finger, right? And I have that pic that I'm keeping for posterity. Our ink is useless. The system has to be seen in its entirety. So the ink is useful, even other things, but by itself, useless.
Mr. Alexander, again, I stand corrected, and you can correct me anytime. SOPs have to be signed when the votes are tabulated, SOPs have to be signed by GECOM presiding officers and also by the individual members of each party, agents of each party.
Quite correct.
So if there's any misunderstanding, the agents of each party don't have to sign that statement. They can protest it's wrong.
Quite correct.
So why they don't do this?
I don't know. I don't know. But I have at hand reach right now. Well, two of the documents were sent to me by PIC. And I have the GECOM documents. And the fact of the matter is, with all of the relevant signatures, there is incongruence across the documents. And it is the same person who purportedly signed, who is saying, what I signed for is not what I saw, what the person signed. But what the person did say does in fact identify a problem, of which that person may be a part.
We had 6 parties that contested this election. The PEP, so this means you had 5 agents outside of the ruling party.
In that particular instance, there were only 4 signatures.
Pardon me?
In that instance, I think there were only 3 or 4 signatures. Not all the parties were present in every polling station.
I know, but they were opposition parties that were still in almost every region, every district, every polling station. Now, my question to you is this. If something is wrong, why would they sign it? But let me move away from that question.
I don't know. I just can't explain it. But I'm just stating the fact.
Okay, let me move away from that question. Jamaica had election on the 3rd of September. The polls closed the same thing like our 6 o'clock. And by 11 o'clock, we know who won in Jamaica. Now, the SOPs, when they're counted, when the polls are closed, the presiding officers don't take a snapshot with a cell phone and forward it to GECOM?
No. There's no electronic transfer of information. It's all manual.
So it has to come to Georgetown, all the SOPs.
So for example, the man down there in New River obviously can't move until next day, right? The man down in Guntrip, I think it is, where there's no aircraft, who has to paddle to come out to Lethem or to Ishalton, that's going to take him a day paddling getting out there, or even by a 25 horsepower. We do have issues in terms of how quick we can transmit in the way in which we transmit, because we do not use electronic transmission. Right?
But if I'm not mistaken, all Caribbean
our law anticipatory says that GECOM has up to 15 days to produce a result. Our law says
how many days?
15 days.
Okay.
That's in the law. This time we've done it much faster. But there are things that we have to work on. For example, this is the first time that we have done posting of the SOPs to the website.
Yeah.
What we did not do was a parallel process of tabulating and posting. So we waited until we posted to tabulate. We can probably do it faster if we find a way to tabulate even as we post. So there are some things there that are issues of efficiency that I think over time, hopefully, GECOM will get it better.
Providing GECOM have new directives and new personnel to manage the organization, I don't think anything will change with the president.
The new personnel may in fact be helpful.
Okay, let me ask you another question about GECOM. We have 6 commissioners, 3 from the opposition, 3 from the government. Obviously, that's a recipe for gridlock, that nothing will pass if the opposition don't agree or if the government don't agree. Don't you think we should have odd numbers like the courts? Like 5,
we have an odd number because it's not 6 commissioners, there's 7 commissioners. The chairperson is a commissioner.
No, excluding the chairperson. Because when the chairperson has to vote, if the chairperson vote for the PEP, 2 or 3 times, you will call the chairperson anti-APNU.
Well,
And
it's
if
not 2 or 3 times, it's all the time.
and if she votes for APNU, she might get the same thing from the PEP. Like we here, we've been told that we are APNU organization. APNU is telling people that we are a PEP organization. So we don't know where we stand, but that's up to the viewers and not up to the people, politicians. I'm the least bothered with that. But if GECOM has a system without getting the commissioner involved, the chairperson could be 7 members, 9 members, 11 members. And don't you think members should come from the clergy, should come from the trade unions, should come from civic society, even though they might belong to some party, but it should not all be appointed by our politicians, by the opposition to the government. They should have
Earlier,
they should have some from the clergy as well. They should have trade unions. Let it represent a broad cross section of the country, don't you think?
earlier in this program, when I said that GECOM needed to be reconstituted, I did say that we needed to look at the Jamaican model. So
Right.
that I said exactly what you were saying. I've said that earlier. I might not have said it in the words in which you were saying it, but I did say that yes, there's probably need for GECOM to be reconstituted. I did reference the Jamaican model, and the Jamaican model speaks to the kinds of things
Right.
that you're talking about. But at the same time, I cautioned about our civil society. You've just held the cloth up in high esteem. And I know in this country where the cloth has invited the president to attend the service and has called upon the membership to render support. If we are having a new commission, that might be the member of the cloth who's nominated. I hope you get the drift.
I got it, yeah. Now, you're saying that you have you made these recommendations and where they lie right now? Nobody in GECOM can see this is needed.
I have made these, I've taken these positions publicly. I've taken them in GECOM. I've taken them when I have had reason to speak with observer teams. My last resort on these matters will be at the level of constitutional reform.
Okay. Now, GECOM is an independent body. Does GECOM have his own set of lawyers?
GECOM's structure provides for a legal officer. At present, we do not have one because the contract of the previous legal officer was not renewed. Again, that was both in the commission, 4 persons agreeing not to renew the contract and 3 persons calling for the contract to be renewed. If one interrogates the non-renewal, again, you will see the nature of GECOM. Here is a person who was assessed by the chairperson, given high marks in that assessment. Here was a person who represented GECOM in court, argues that what he said in court is no different from the documentation prepared, but it did not coincide with the position of the Attorney General. And here is the person who, after being properly assessed, getting a good grade, who, having been promised by the chairperson that there was no problems with renewal, shortly after, the chairperson voted with the PPP for non-renewal.
I have a question for you personally here. I normally don't take personal questions, but this person is a question. So, Mr. Alexander, it seems to me, not the person is saying, that GECOM, your job is a very stressful one. Why do you want to go through that stress? You can find a much easier job. You can find a much easier job and leave GECOM alone.
I agree with the person that it's a stressful undertaking. And I haven't used the word job, I've used the word undertaking. For all intents and purposes, I am a retiree, right? I'm a retiree. Of course, previously, for 7 years, I wasn't a retiree, but I retired in 2014.
Right.
So I am 10 years into retirement. So this isn't a job. It is stressful, indeed, and sometimes I do ask myself the question, why continue? But let me say this to you. I am hailed, and no ambiguity intended. I am hailed every day by scores of people in the street who say to me, please, Mr. Alexander, stay the course. You're looking out for us. And so by staying there partly has to do with public pressure. Partly has to do with public pressure. I must confess, I served in Parliament, and now I'm serving as a commissioner. And if there were positions in which I worked where I felt completely frustrated, it was in Parliament as a parliamentarian, where the President Speaker told me the government will get its way, opposition will get its say. Somebody repeated that recently. And we're in GECOM. People say, well, you've had your say. It's frustrating. It's stressful.
But GECOM is supposed to be an unbiased organization and governing the interests of the people. But I know it's not doing that at all times. This means that a thorough reform of GECOM is needed. The political biasness got to be raised, and GECOM should be seen like the rest of the Caribbean countries with their election commissions.
You know, when we had a vacancy for the chief elections officer, there was a Jamaican who was eminently qualified, more qualified in terms of academic qualifications and in terms of experience than the person to whom we gave the job. And what did the chairperson say? You advertise. You encourage people from overseas to apply. And when they apply and they're superior, you say, you need somebody who knows the local situation. And you give the job to the less qualified person. That is what occurred. That is what occurred. Right? There was another situation in GECOM where we made a recommendation. We said, look, why doesn't GECOM outsource its employment? In other words, rather than have the commissioners, these political commissioners, determine who we recruit, let us establish the criteria. And we have established criteria. Let us then advertise. Let us then go and get some professional people, probably even from overseas, to be the ones who do the recruitment in the sense that they do the interviews, they score the persons, they determine who best fits the bill. And then it comes to the commission, we do the employment. That was refused. Commissioner says we have a responsibility to conduct these affairs, and if we do that, we give up our responsibility. Balgadash. That's one of the propositions that could start to make a difference. Where you don't have the political people determining, particularly when you're employing your CEO and your DCEO, all of which, as far as I'm concerned, their employment process was corrupted. And I'm prepared to say this publicly, and there could be no bond refuting in those regards what I say, because it's factual, right? Let's outsource it. Let's get some professionals, you know?
We're coming to the end of the program. One final question for you. Hope you'll be short. Do you intend to continue as a commissioner, or you will step aside and give way to Mohammed?
For the time being, I'm continuing.
For the time you continue.
For the time being, I'm continuing, but I'm keeping an eye on what's being said and what's being done in the political arena in this regard. I have at minimum continued onto an evaluation of elections 2025. 2022, the chairperson refused an evaluation. 2025, I thought I had seen an item in the work plan for an evaluation. I raised the matter a few weeks ago. The CEO said that there was no item called an evaluation in the work plan. I then requested that we amend the work plan to put in the evaluation because I think it is necessary to have an evaluation of the project called elections so that we can see if there are areas in which we can improve on the system. And so I feel obligated, at minimum, to be there up to the evaluation.
Okay.
The rest is up in the air.
Lastly, we have to get off because it's coming to 9 o'clock. On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate GECOM performance in this election? 10 meaning the highest.
In terms of the conduct of the exercise on E-Day, and I want it to be clear, the conduct of what was permitted on E-Day, I would say that the GECOM would be somewhere around B plus C.
B plus, okay.
Scale, right? That's
okay.
where I would place them. But that is about what was prescribed to be done on election day and the manner in which it was done. If I am to comment on GECOM's ability, GECOM's capacity to conduct elections, given the things that they've excluded from the process, GECOM has an F grade.
Okay. Folks, we have come to the end of the program. It's 9:01. We finished at 9. Mr. Alexander, your closing remarks, please.
There isn't very much for me to say. Hopefully the public out there have heard what I have said. At the end of the day, they're the ones that in their actions really determine what happens at the level of government and governance. I have shared, I have accounted. The ball, in many regards, are in their hands. They have showed their hand for 2020, for 2025. But democracy requires that government be responsive even in between elections. And therefore, they have the right to continue to throw their hands on all matters of governance.
Thank you, sir. And again, thanks to Mr. Noir Singh for making this program available, Mr. Devin Kissoon and Ryan Gobin, our two technical directors, and thanks to you, our sponsors and our listeners. We have come to the end of the program. As of next week, we'll be no longer broadcasting on Mondays, but on Wednesdays only. So Mr. Noir Singh will be on next week, Wednesday from the same time from 7:30 to 9. And the following week, I'll be on again from 7:30 to 9. So I hope you'll tune in with us. This program has been an exciting program, and I want to give special thanks to Mr. Vincent Alexander for enlightening us on the management, the operations, and the structure of GECOM. So again, Mr. Alexander, thank you very much, and good night to you and everyone else.
Thank you for the opportunity, and good night to your viewers as yourself.